while it's good to see they've updated that faction, we have seen other factions get like updates who haven't seen much love in Warcry. So I would love to see armies like the Seraphon, who've had quite a phenomenal range refresh, get some rules to update their models, to update them and go, hey, you know, they've got Raptidon Riders, they've got Agrodon Lancers if that's what they want to go towards. But even just the new Saurus Warriors, who got an extra wound in Age of Sigmar, all of a sudden, they're not getting anything new for Warcry. I'd love to see them get something new. Far out, I'll tell you. Those Commander games creep me out.
Yeah, that was... Ooh, boy, those were some good Commander games.
Those are some Commander games.
That Windfall really did me in. Because I just drew into Colossal Majesty and lands.
And lands,
and I was like, oh, cool, what was the next thing I draw? A land.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Welcome to From the Vault podcast. This time, it's a little bit different one. Today, it is your boy Trent and...
It's your boy Connor in front of the camera this time.
So today, we're doing a bit of a different one. Dylan is not in the studio with us today. It is just Connor and I. Today, we are going to be talking about something very dear to our heart. We're going to talk about a game we mention all the time, Warcry. Warcry is a game made by Games Workshop. It is a Age of Sigmar supplemental game, essentially, utilizing the Age of Sigmar models and the Age of Sigmar universe to play like a skirmish game. If you've ever heard of something called Kill Team to 40k, that's kind of how you can look at Warcry when you compare it to Age of Sigmar. It is take the minis you already know and love, possibly ones you've already painted, and play a different rule set that lets you apply those in like a skirmish setting.
And it gives them a bit more personality as well when it's instead of being one in a crowd, they're one in a group of individuals.
Exactly. It's easy to kind of get lost in the sea of like 80 gobos. Yeah. But in like Warcry, you know, you're probably being like maybe 9 to 11 like goblins at any given point. So it's easy to kind of give each one their own personality.
Yeah.
So why do we love Warcry? That's the first kind of question we want to talk about today. Warcry, it's honestly, I think the first thing that drags me to it is we just mentioned that the kind of the character.
Yeah.
Warcry is a game that makes not only can you use the Sigmar miniatures, it does actually release its own what we call bespoke warbands, akin to something that we saw actually in the last episode. We talked about God Tier, Dylan and I, and you were obviously there for that, Connor. Yep. We talked about how there's a lot of character in those factions, a lot of character in those little models, and they kind of released their own ones of those for Warcry, and you can kind of pick those up and just assemble and paint them the way they're meant to be made. Yeah. Or you could take your own models and kind of kit bash, as it's the term goes, to kind of make your own models. That's the kind of thing that kind of drew me into it. I wanted to spend some time modeling and hobbying and assembling and painting unique miniatures.
Yeah, and I think it gives you the chance to build some miniatures or play with some miniatures that you wouldn't necessarily see in a lot of the like Age of Sigmar style games as well.
Absolutely.
So you get to, you know, be like, oh, cool, I can take these guys and actually use... You know, say you're playing Blades of Khorne, you know, Khorne Bloodbound. It's like I can take my Korgoroth and my Blood Reavers and actually have them be impactful on the map instead of just being like a focal point and a bunch of chaff.
Definitely.
I think the mentality shifts between the game because of just how different the rule system is and the types of models that you get to use.
Definitely. And I think that's a good point. You learn like the Korgoroth is a good example. Also from like a meta standpoint, Warcry is a very simple system. And we're going to talk about the system in a second. And we're going to talk about how easy it is to play and how easy it is to pick up. But because the nature of its simple rules, models don't have like huge disparity in necessarily how useful they are within a faction. So if you can access those models in Warcry, chances are at a baseline level, they're probably pretty good. Like just playing the models. Whereas if you're playing a game like Age of Sigmar, you know, there are going to be some stinkers in your battle tome, and there are going to be some real like shine outs. And I think an example like the Korgoroth in a Blades of Khorne army really doesn't necessarily see a lot of play, isn't necessarily a great model. But in Warcry, oh my gosh, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. And I think the thing about Warcry is that you find a lot of the time you're designing around the numbers 3, 4, and 5. Whereas like with, you know, obviously with like 40k, the baseline is like strength 4, toughness 4. Like 4 is the baseline for a lot of things.
Yep.
In Warcry, it's like, is it 3, is it 4, or is it 5?
That's definitely.
And that's almost across the board, barring a few fringe cases, like smaller minis that have like, you know, 2 strength or whatever like that. Everything will fall in that 3, 4, or 5 range.
Exactly. And because also, speaking of 3, 4, and 5, the game also is a little bit granular in the sense that, or at least I would say a little bit more forgiving in the sense that, you know, in a game like 40k where you're rolling your strength versus your toughness, and that goes all the way to doubles where you'll like wound on 2s or wound on 6s based on being double or half. That doesn't happen in Warcry.
No.
In Warcry, the best you'll ever hit somebody on is 3, maybe with some rerolls or something else involved very rarely. Very, very rarely.
Very rare to get a reroll.
Incredibly rare. Yeah. I think I've seen one rule, and that's like the Stormcast warning shot. which just gives you rerolls. That's the only rule I've really seen that does it.
Yeah.
And you're really just hitting on 3s or 5s at worst.
Yeah.
So it also means that, like, you know, if you're in playing a lot of, again, we could talk about 40k because that's the strength versus toughness debate, and it is a Games Workshop game. You know, if you have a lot of like wounding on 6 stuff, it can feel really, really bad. There are often times in 40k where I'll go, hey, you know, the cultists are punching the knight, and you go, okay, well, I'll just roll the dice, but it doesn't freaking matter because I'll roll a bunch of 6+ to wound, and then you'll roll a bunch of 2+ save, and it just won't matter. Whereas if, you know, in the random swing, 1 wound will happen.
Yeah.
Whereas in Warcry, like a single goblin can do some kind of damage to a Kurnoth Hunter.
Yeah.
Because it has just the access to, oh, well, at worst, it's 5s.
Yeah.
As a man who plays a lot of the Glue Spike Gets faction, the Goblin faction, I'm rolling 5s a lot of the time to hit with my models because they're so weak, but a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I think the answer, like the thing that I like about Warcry is like less rerolls. I think its answer to rerolls is by giving additional dice or manipulating that 3, 4, or 5 number to, you know, oh, say you're hitting on a strength 3 versus a toughness 5. That means you'll be hitting on 5s. But if you have an ability, which is one of the other things that I really love about Warcry is the ability system, which I'm sure we'll get into, you can manipulate those numbers, or you can throw an extra dice into that attack pool over the course of 2 actions, as opposed to I have to roll X amount of dice and hope to hit X number. So like, you know, if hitting 5s on, you know, hitting 5+ on, say, 4 dice upgraded to 5 dice is going to be easier than having to throw 20 dice at 6s. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And it also feels a lot better because you're often, the spikes don't happen as much. I think to add to that kind of point as well, and we'll talk about this now, is the ability system and the kind of action system. 2 things. The first one is all units in Warcry have 2 activations.
Yes.
There are, 2 actions, my apologies, per activation.
Yeah.
And this is different with monsters, but I will go past monsters for today's discussion. Each fighter in Warcry will only have those 2 actions and will activate once per battle round. So say I'll have 5 dudes, Connor will have 5 dudes. We'll each activate those 5 dudes one at a time across from each other until we're out of activations, and that battle round is done. Yeah. And that's done 4 times over 4 battle rounds. And where that means that if I say, for example, let's use the 5, that means we'll only have 10 actions to make.
Yeah.
But there's this rule called abilities where you get to use something unique and special, often to your faction, that allows you to, between those actions of a single fighter, do something unique. Yeah. And that could be something as simple as I have +1 to strength on my melee weapons. Yeah. It could be something as powerful as a bonus move followed by a bonus attack, which give you like 4 actions in a turn. The thing that I like about this action system, this ability system, is not so much that I get something to do in my actions, because I think Warcry is great because it's so simple. What it gives me, though, is the generic abilities mean that everybody feels like they're also playing at this same level. Yeah. You know, the man you mentioned earlier, you mentioned that whole, I can get +1 attack for a whole activation. Yeah. That double, which we'll get to, that ability on a double, everyone can access, right? Yeah. Which means that everyone can kind of do that math and have access to that same rule. It doesn't feel like, you know, the disparity of some games where it's like, you know, this faction might have 15 to 16 unique rules that no other faction is going to access. Or if there is some overlap, there is here and there. But really, they have their rules and another faction has their rules. And those are so different. And you have to make the best out of those rules, you know? Capitalize on those rules. Yeah. Whereas in Warcry, the generic abilities are kind of the best ones.
You tend to lean on them a lot more, I think, just because they're so applicable in a lot of situations. Whether it's your +1 attack or your +1 move, or if you have if you get a quad, which is 4 dice of the same type in your ability roll, you can get an extra movement and an extra attack, which in a turn, outside of those 2 actions that you can make, is really powerful, can really swing the game.
Absolutely. And that's a huge thing as well that I was going to talk about. I landed on a thing called a double. Connor's talking about a thing called a quad. Well, in Warcry, when you go to do your initiative, when you're deciding who activates first, you roll your initiative dice, and the results of those dice, a bit like Yahtzee style, you'll get your doubles and your triples and such and put them aside. The results of those dice will determine not only who's going first in the battle round, but what abilities you have access to for that battle round. So you kind of also know what abilities your opponent has access to. And in a lot of these other games, you'll find that it's like there's this information overload, this kind of bloat, where it's like, oh, my opponent can activate any number of these rules at any point in the game. I think Star Wars Legion is a game that does the card system really well, where they kind of have their one big ability. But because every unit has all of these card like abilities on their card as well, you
Yeah.
kind of go like, oh well, these like vanguards can do a thing in the rebel force, this ATS can do a thing, these Wookiees can do another thing, and you got to keep in mind all these things.
And what's the sequencing of those abilities? You know?
Exactly. Whereas in Warcry, you go, oh, my opponent rolled a triple. Okay, I know they have their factions 1 or 2 abilities, and 1 or 2 units can use that ability.
Yeah.
Like models. That's like a single dude. And then they have the generic triple of Inspiring Presence, or anything that's like lower than that. But that's Warcry. But that's not a lot of stuff to keep your mind on. Like, you just got to go, well, again, if my opponent has a good ability access to them, they're going to use it.
Yeah.
But say I go, oh, I rolled the triple. My opponent goes, hey, who can use your faction's triple? Oh, this guy over here. And they go, cool, I'm going to focus that guy on my attacks, or make sure I'm far away from him for when the triple goes off.
And the good thing about it too is that it's like, even on your like, worst roll, you could either have like 1 set of abilities on like a double and 4 singles, because you can get, just single dice that don't really do anything. Or you could roll 3 doubles, but that means you're definitely not going first in initiative.
Exactly.
Or you could get 2 triples, or you could get, 2 doubles, 2 singles.
Exactly. Here's that thing that I was going to get into here as well. Absolutely. So this rolling the dice for initiative. So let's break it down for those listening at home. Each of you will take 6 dice, right? You'll roll them onto the table, and you'll take your dice and go, what number matches on these dice. So I'll say I have a 5, a 6, a 3, and then a 2, and a 1.
Yeah.
And I'll take those dice and I'll go, okay, well, I have 2 2s. That's a double 2.
Yep.
And then I have 4 single dice. Single dice, as you mentioned, don't really do anything, right? In the respect of they don't directly benefit me in the abilities.
Yeah.
But the player with the most single dice left after initiative is determined will go first and activate the first model. Or I think they get to choose. But they'll get to choose who activates their first model.
Yeah.
So it's this weird balance of like, you want lots of ability dice because you want to be able to use good abilities, but there's a lot of turns where you want to go first in that, or choose who activates first so you could play the action economy game. So it's good to have this kind of like, you're not just going, oh, these 4 single dice just don't do anything. I rolled really bad. And my opponent goes, I rolled 2 triples. And it's like, oh my gosh,
Well, I mean, that's where wild dice come in, which is another cool mechanic that I like about the Warcry initiative system, is that at the beginning of each turn, you get a single dice added to a pool known as wild dice. These are dice that you can add to those initiative dice in order to upgrade them from a double to a triple to a quad, or even a single to a double. Or you can even use it to make a single to steal initiative.
Yes, so you can actually generate more singles by using those wild dice.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, those wild dice make or break the way abilities like kind of the logic of abilities in your head. You might go, oh, this guy has like a good triple ability, so I need to roll 3 of the same value of the dice. And you go, man, that's going to be hard because you're rolling 6 dice. You're not likely, or not super likely to roll like 3 4s in a row. Yeah. So you go, okay, well, how can I do this? Okay, but if I have a wild dice every turn and I need this triple, for example, then I only need to roll a double or or better in order to go, okay, wild dice on the double, make it a triple. Now I've got my triple like available to me. Yeah. There's one last layer where the number on the dice actually matter as well.
Yes. The value of the ability.
Exactly. Excuse me there. The value of the ability where, if you have a 5, that's usually a lot better than a 2. Yeah. Sometimes, and this comes into the generic abilities a lot, sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes the ability won't care what the value of the ability is, but sometimes they do. And sometimes it makes a big difference. Yeah. So having access to that wild dice is important because, again, you might need a double and you might need to be a good number. Say you want to be a 6, so you can have 6 dice. It's very easy on 6 dice to roll a single 6. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's on average probably going to happen, right? Yeah. So you go, okay, if I have a good double that needs the value of the ability, well, that's a great ability by definition almost. Yeah. Because I can always kind of hopefully guarantee I'm getting a 6, at least 1 6, and then just turn that into a double with a wild dice if I need it desperately. Yeah. But the cool part is that, as Connor mentioned, you're going to get a wild dice every turn, and you're not forced to spend them.
No, you can bank them up.
You can bank them up. So you can have 1, and then on turn 2, you'll have 2. On turn 3, you'll have 3. Yeah. And you'll have 4 on that big last turn. Yeah. So if you need that last turn to go really well in your favor, you want to bank all your wild dice up. Yeah. But I'm a bit greedy when I play Warcry. Yeah. I very much love to spend my wild dice.
Sometimes you tend to like, you go all in on like a turn 2, and then it's like, oh, cool. If I sit back, I've got 3 dice in the next turn, so I can kind of use that to respond to what you're doing. So exactly. There's a tactical level to how you use your abilities and your initiative before you even get to rolling dice on the table itself.
And that's what I really like, where a lot of the thinking and math and a lot of like the difficulty of the game, I think I would add, is in that phase. It's in that initiative phase. That's where the real, like, I guess you cut the wheat from the chaff, right?
Yes.
Where it's like, if you're a really, really good Warcry player, you are almost winning and losing games in this phase. And then when you actually get to the playing the round phase, that's the fun and engaging part, but doesn't feel nearly as impactful as this initiative phase, where that's really, really important. So, and then of course, you get past that wild dice, you get past rolling all your initiative, you spend your dice how you want, you recheck who has the most singles, because after you spent wild dice, you may have spent someone change some singles off. Your opponent by steal sees it that way. You check who has initiative, cool. If the initiative is changed, that person will decide who goes first in the next battle round. And then you'll play the game and you'll activate your fighters back and forth and that's it.
And so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Well, I guess now that we've kind of laid out that important, like, pivotal sort of rule set for the game, let's kind of talk about, like, how we first got involved with Warcry and, like, our humble beginnings and sort of...
Yeah, why don't you start?
Okay, well, for me, I first played Warcry here at Vault Games, not this store, but the old store back on Charlotte Street when it had just come out. And Dylan was like, hey, here's this game called Warcry. Do you want to play? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm definitely down. I played Iron Golems into his Untamed Beast, and I got roundly walloped, but I thought that the game system was very interesting. And I'd just come off years of playing 40K almost exclusively, and so I was like a bit sort of minis game worn out, and I was like, I played a lot of D&D, you just got me into Commander as well, so I was playing a lot of those types of games. But Warcry kind of tickled me in a way. It's like, oh, it's low model count, the abilities, it's got a fun ability initiative system. There's an element of randomness to the battle reports and the way that, like, the terrain set up using cards and the twists that play out during the game as well, that I really liked, because it's like I can take a character and get married to that character in a narrative sense. And I play a lot of my games for narrative. I love stories. Like Dylan was saying in the God Tier episode, you love those moments in games that you can refer back to years later. If it's like a rules flub up, or it's like, hey, remember when my Khan ran it like in a land raider towards your knight and took it down in one turn? You know what I mean? It's the same thing in Warcry. It's like, remember when your Troggoth and my Kroxigor met in the middle of the battlefield and you managed to just absolutely clap me down before they'd even managed to strike a blow at each other. Yep. Those kinds of moments, that's what got me into it. So I played that. Then it kind of fell by the wayside for a bit, and then I moved over to the UK. And whilst I was in the UK, I started working in LGS, and I built up their commander scene over there. And then I was like, all right, well, I want to get more minis guys in. We've got 40K, but we don't really have any, like, AOS representation. And obviously this was post-COVID, so people were kind of hurting in the finance department. Some people had bought Age of Sigmar back in the day, but hadn't quite translated that into playing more games on the table. So Warcry came back up in my head. I was like, I wonder if that's still ticking off. And it was sort of just on the back end of the transition period from like 1.0 to like 1.5.
Which is what we're currently in, for reference. Yeah.
And so I started to push that at the game store that I worked at. And we started getting in the bespoke warbands, like, the OG, like the Spire Tyrants and the Splintered Fang, Untamed Beast, Iron Golems, Corvus Cabal. That was quite the terror in our pod, because the manager of the owner of the store, Charlie, was my boss. Shout out to Charlie, by the way. He played Corvus Cabal, and that Raven Dart double ability was just so oppressive. Then they released the compendium rules, and they brought out, Seraphon, Lizardman, all the Order armies. So like Stormcast could play, Skaven could play, everything. It opened everything up. So it wasn't just the bespoke warbands. But the thing about the bespoke warbands is it was one box at like £60. That was your whole army, and you could play it out the box like that. Exactly. And that grabbed people because it was a game of economy, and the rule set was so simple. I even taught it to a couple of 9-year-old kids who'd come they're like, oh, we want to get into Warhammer. And I was like, we had a bit of a game going on in the front window, and they're like, oh, what's that? And be like, Warcry, do you want to come over and learn? Taught them. They came back the next week, and they each bought 2 bespoke warbands each. So they basically bought out all of our stock at that point.
Amazing.
So we had to get more in. And then, from there, obviously I came back to Australia. And I was like, I really like Warcry. I've been flying the flag. I want to keep playing it. And then you were like, hey, we've got a Thursday night thing where we've got a couple people in for Warcry. And I think you were already playing it at that point.
Yep.
And I was like, I'm all in on this. And that's sort of my journey with Warcry over the course of, 2 continents and many years.
Yeah, so my journey is not as, I don't think it's as exciting, definitely not. My journey was, so I'd looked at Warcry from afar, so Warcry kind of came out, right? And Warcry was this thing where, so there's a few layers. So I played a lot of Age of Sigmar. I loved Age of Sigmar. As a kid, I kind of grew up looking at fantasy. Yeah. Like I looked at fantasy all the time. I lived in Bundaberg for a short amount of time, and I would look at this, the Bundaberg Miniatures of Games. Shout out to them. They're long gone now, but they had all these like different rooms, and people were always playing fantasy. It was very fantasy focused there. Like no 40k was being played, right. So I used to watch a lot, and I couldn't afford it as a kid. So I was like, oh no. And my mom bought me the Battle for Skull Pass set when I was like a wee lad, and that was my first ever touching of actual Warhammer miniatures, and I was like painting night goblins and dwarves and such, and really getting my like love with that game. And then when Sigmar came out, and I knew people were playing it, and I met Dylan, I started interacting with Volt a lot more. He kind of got me into Age of Sigmar it was really around the start of second edition, not so much first edition.
It was Soul Wars, correct?
Yeah, it was around the Soul Wars, right? And I actually started with Nighthaunt because I just thought the ghosts were so cool. So I played a lot of Sigmar. And then it wasn't until we came to this store. So we moved into this store here in Queen Street in Brisbane. And some guys were coming in, and it was like Kirby and Jamin, and they were playing together. I looked at them playing Warcry. I was like, oh, what are you guys up to? They're like, oh, playing Warcry. You know, Kill Team? Yeah, it's Kill Team, but for Sigmar. I'm like, oh, dude, I've got some Sigmar miniatures. I'll give it a go. And they're like, yeah, sure. And they were playing, I think it was like the Spire Tyrants versus Iron Golems. I'm pretty certain, actually. Same matchup. They were playing this. I was like, okay, cool. And then I looked online at the Warcry warbands. I want to see what I could play. And I learned that at the time, there were compendium armies, but there wasn't like an online resource for it. Yeah. It was like you would buy or get out of White Dwarfs these compendium cards, which would give you all of your rules. But I didn't have any of these freaking cards. Yeah. So I was like, oh, I really can't play this. So I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to buy a warband. So I looked online, I looked at all the warbands that were there for offer, and it was like, again, Splintered Fang, Corvus Cabal, Spire Tyrants. At this point, it was getting closer and closer towards the release of like the new edition of Warcry,
like the Heart of Gur.
The Heart of Gur. Yeah. And we started getting these other warbands. There's one that's like the Scions of Flame, if I remember the name correctly. Yes. There were these other warbands coming out, and they were cool. But the more I looked at them, the more I saw Chaos Cultists, right? Because the setting of the original Warcry was in the 8 points, which was like all about chaos. It's all these chaos warbands fighting for control. And my brain kind of like, it almost just like pattern recognized. And it went like, oh, you've got the green cultists with their shirts off, and you've got the red cultists with their shirts off, and you've got the green and like the orange and the blue, and you've got all these different factions. But it's really just comes down to guys who wear different makeup and armor, if they wear armor at all, usually with their like shirts off and their tits out. Yeah. And it came back to, well, this is not what I go into Warhammer for. I love things like ghosts and goblins, and I like lizards, and I like, Tomb Kings. Like I like all the kind of factions. In 40k, I play the Tau Empire, the Necrons, the Orcs. I love my kind of out of the box Xenos kind of weird factions. Yeah. So when I just saw a bunch of dudes in Search, I kind of went, oh, this is not like exciting for me from a hobby standpoint. Yeah. They're great quality models. I think that especially the Splintered Fang are just really, really cool. I actually play the Horns of a Shoot now. So a little bit hypocritical there, because they are really just shirtless dudes with like bull helmets on. Yeah. However, they are very cool.
Yeah. Some cool abilities.
Really cool abilities. That Ash Bomb. Oh my gosh.
And the paint job you did on them is excellent. I believe they're still at home here in the store in the cabinet.
They exist in the cabinet. Yeah. So, and I use them to teach other players because they're quite an easy faction to pick up. But for me, I was like, oh, this is not for me. And then the new Warcry edition came out, and it was on Warhammer Community, and I was reading, I was like, oh, is it about the time that I give this a shot? And at this time, I had seen some more games happen. Like I watched Kirby play his Stormcast Eternals with Ether Wings, flying around, picking up treasures, being a nuisance that way. Yeah. I watched somebody bring Ogres, and then my friend Barty's actually been on the show before. He's been on Hardcast in the sense that he's been producing for us before. Yeah. I think he's actually produced it from the Vault episode before, if I remember correctly. And he's just brilliant. So shout out to Barty. But he actually gave me this compendium card for Nighthaunt because he just had it. He was like, oh yeah, I had this some ages ago. Do you want to play Nighthaunt? I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. So this card, and then it was only about a month later, they announced the compendium coming out for Warcry 1.5, and it was like a book and an online resource with all of the factions in it.
Yeah.
And I mean all of the factions that currently existed in the game.
Which I think really opened up the game, not only in terms of aesthetics, but just like bringing in other enfranchised and Age of Sigmar players who had these models. So like now I've got something that isn't necessarily a 2-hour plus investment of a full AOS game, but I can still get the chance of rolling a dice. And
exactly.
I think compared to that, it's a little bit more beer and pretzels, but I think you can take it into the more casual and competitive realms, which is why I think it's such a good game.
It is innately a very tactical game.
Yeah.
And I think that does kind of itch that competitive kind of like itch that people have. I'll scratch that competitive itch, I should say. However, like we said, you know, it is a very simple game to play. So it's very easy to just kind of get yourself a drink and just play with your friends and just roll dice and have fun. Yeah. And the games are pretty like snappy and quick. They usually go for around 45 minutes to 60 minutes. So, you know, having the game be so simple does really add to that kind of experience.
Yeah.
But for me, I was like, the one thing that could always hold me back was just, I primarily get into these things for the hobby of the game.
Yeah.
And for like the, how I can make my own models and paint them up, make them look really gorgeous. And just seeing only Chaos Warbands really put me off. Yeah. So then I could bring my Iron Jaws, I could bring my Lizardmen, everything. And I went, wow, this is really cool. And then I learned that, like I said, there was a whole online resource. So you could jump on the Warhammer community website. This is still true today. And download PDFs of every single compendium. So if you've ever played Age of Sigmar, even fantasy, as in we're very casual guys here. Our group is very casual. We don't care if you have square bases or round bases. Just play the game with us. We love to play with you guys.
Yes.
Bring along those models because you have rules. And if somebody in the community has the book, they have the book. But again, you can download those for free, bring them on your phone and play games with us. And that's what the game, I think, does a lot to get people in.
And even the FAQ as well, like they're constantly updating. I said we get a new FAQ like what, once every 2 or 3 months?
Yeah, once every 3 months,
which is pretty good. Like it keeps the game fresh. Like the latest one had some big sweeping changes. Like it updated like monster things. And then the most recent one, they fixed the points totals for one of the bespoke warbands, the Vulcan Flame Seekers, which is the Fire Slayers or Dwarven Slayer warband that comes with the little baby dragon.
Little baby worm, yeah.
Because the thing about that box, most of the, if not all the bespoke warbands, fit within the 1,000 point limit or just underneath that.
Yep.
Vulcan Flame Seekers was the only one that was over by about 10 points, I think.
Yeah, only just.
So you basically have to sans out a model from the box. Now they've updated that, so the whole box is within the 1,000 points.
Which is the way it should be, right?
Yeah. But also, Cities of Sigmar, well, along with their new models, got a much pared down list building thing. So they basically take all the cities, and it was like 7 cities with 7 ability tables, and you have to choose.
It was messy.
It was messy. Now they've got 3 army like divergences, I should say, which is your Castellites, which are the new gun toady pistolly free guild models, Darkling Coven, which is your dark elves, and then you've got Dispossessed, which are your old school, dwarves, grudge bearers and all that sort of thing. Where was I going with this?
They just released the new rules.
They just released the new rules for them. Sorry to cut you off. But yeah, they just updated that, which is great because Cities of Sigmar has always been the red-headed stepchild of not only AOS but Warcry as well. And now in Warcry, it feels like they have much more of an identity, which again comes back to them constantly updating the game and keeping it fresh.
But to be fair on that as well, I do want to say, this is actually something we talked about right before the stream started.
Yeah.
Was the recording started, sorry, was not only... Okay, so Cities of Sigmar did get a new update range, right? Which was really good. And it's glad to see they got like a lot of their new models got rules. And when they did that, they took the opportunity to really condense down what was a really convoluted faction, to be fully fair.
Yeah.
Because in Warcry, right, you can ally other units from your Grand Alliance, right?
Yes.
So say, for example, you want to bring Stormcast Tunnels, you want to bring a single like Seraphon character. Yeah. They both work for the same kind of faction. They're both under Grand Alliance order. You could do that. But unlike other games which say like, oh, but, if you want to do that, we don't want to incentivize that. So therefore, they lose all their cool stuff and you're kind of working with just what we call a data sheet, just kind of their core rules. No, in Warcry, like, you get their abilities. Like, you get everything they can have access to. And it's kind of like mix-matching your own. However, you're just limited to how many allies you can bring in, right? You have your core warband, and usually it's like a quarter basically works out that can come in as allies. Well, obviously with Cities of Sigmar, you've got this one faction with all these different warbands. And I should say sub-factions.
Yeah.
And they all could ally with each other.
Yeah.
So it's just so much information to kind of process. So condensing that down was a good thing. And I think that they've given these new Cities of Sigmar models rules to come along and accommodate that, because they want an excuse to fix those rules.
And I think it also simplifies the design language as well, because if you like old Cities of Sigmar, you would have your Wood Elves or Wanderers with your Dwarves and your Free Guild Gunners, and it would look like almost 3 different armies that have been slap-chopped together, and it just didn't feel the same, because then you're plastering those units together that don't have a very similar design language with a very generic set of rules to kind of force an identity onto them.
Correct, yeah.
These new rules feel like they have an identity, which a lot of the bespoke warbands as well, they had that because they were designed from the ground up to have a certain play style, to have a certain design language. So that's kind of good that they've done that. And I think that's sort of part of the core philosophy now of Warcry is that design of like designing these warbands with like not only the miniature design language, but also making a rule set that fits them. And thematically.
It's very top-down design, isn't it? It's like we go, we want to make a faction that's like, they revere like an ancient, blacksmith god, like a bull-headed blacksmith god. This is the horns of the shoot, right?
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, well, how do we make them look like these really cool things? Here's what they're going to look like. Okay, now let's give those rules and make them really feel like they're ashy and hot and they're really like aggressive and they're bull chargy. And they give them these rules. But the interesting part I want to get into, which I was building up from the Cities of Sigmar discussion, is that while it's good to see that they've updated that faction, we have seen other factions get like updates who haven't seen much love in Warcry. So I would love to see armies like the Seraphon, who've had quite a phenomenal range refresh, get some rules to update their models, to update them and go, hey, they've got Raptidon Riders, they've got Agrodon Lancers if that's what they want to go towards. But even just the new Saurus Warriors, who got an extra wound in Age of Sigmar, all of a sudden, they're not getting anything new for Warcry. I'd love to see them get something new. And this goes with like the new Iron Jaws Ard Boys.
Yes.
Maybe not the Morgrunter, am I right? But the Ard Boys, that kind of stuff. There's some units coming out for Sigmar that just don't seem to get the kind of love that Warcry could offer them.
Yes.
And this also kind of goes into the Underworld's warbands, which is a game I'm going to get onto now, which is Sigmar is weird because you can look at 40k, right? And you've got Warhammer 40k, Kill Team, right? They're 2 completely different game modes. One has like a boarding action, which is trying to be Kill Team light. But other than that, they're just 2 completely different games that utilize those same miniatures. But Age of Sigmar has Age of Sigmar. It has the Cursed City, which while that's unique models, like that's still using their design language. You've got Warcry, and then you've got Warhammer Underworlds. So it's got like almost 4 different games all under that Sigmar kind of IP. When in reality, they can't even really... It feels like they can't support all these things at once, right? Because Underworlds is a game that I used to play a lot of. I actually played it long before Warcry. And its support kind of fell away. And they make new models for it. They make new boxes for it because they're not just going to drop it like a hot rock. But their organized play kit started to get less and less often and less engaging. And all of a sudden, their core mechanics, like the deck building element, they started pushing to the wayside and saying, hey, here's Rivals deck, so you don't have to deck build anymore.
It feels like it was a game that had an identity crisis because like I played it way back when. It's like, you build the decks and then you bring the models. And like the best part about Underworlds, I think, is those like sculpts because they're easy to play. So dynamics, a lot of personality, and they were just cool. Like I still want to get myself Starblood Stalkers for my Seraphon so I can have them as counts as models and not necessarily bring them in Warcry as their Bladeborn forms. But Underworlds was like, it went from being this deck builder with miniatures to being, here's the pre-made decks in order to supplement you playing this game with miniatures. And then it's just kind of like, well, you've taken away that. So it means that retroactively, half of the game that you'd already been building for is no longer really effective, or you can't really do anything.
It no longer exists.
And then there was like weird ban lists as well. Like there was a Nighthaunt warband that had like a card ban, so you could only have like one of each of these 2 cards. And
correct. So they would sorry to jump in, but they would limit cards because they would realize that in external game, card games are hard to balance in the first place. So they would go, we're just gonna make like good cards and make factions cool. But over the course of their lives, so much of the game would change, and so many more cards would come out that eventually you'd go, wow, the design language of these cards is like an 8 out of 10. And we keep making factions that have 6 out of 10 cards because we want to balance them. So now we go, okay, well, the Thorns of the Briar Queen, which was the one that had like the issues, we're going to take 3 of their cards and limit them so you can only bring 1 of these 3 cards. And it became very frustrating for players, I think, just to kind of get involved with this. And that's why they changed the rival system. Like, I think the change of the rival system was best for the game. But my point being is that because people kind of got a little bit disillusioned, I think, with Warhammer Underworlds. People I've seen migrate more to Warcry. And then I've seen in White Dwarves, which is their magazine, Warhammer magazine, and I've seen this all over the place, they've started releasing, you know, Warcry rules, and you mentioned these Bladeborn, for what they call Bladeborn, which is the Underworld's warbands, to try and sell Underworld minis, because I think they're realizing that Underworld is a sinking ship, and they go, well, we have a game that a lot of people are supporting, and that's Warcry. Now, I use a lot of the Underworld's miniatures too, because the sculpts are fantastic, no question there, as counts as models in my faction as well. A lot of my Gloomspike Gitz models are from Underworld's warbands, and I say, this is a stabber with a sticker, this is a stabber with a
Grimcrack's Looncourt was a great box.
Great box for Warcry. A brilliant box. Because that's the thing, right? You know, we talk about buying a box and playing Warcry, right? And when you buy a bespoke warband, you get, you know, 7 different guys usually, and then a couple of the same guys.
So usually like your hero or two hero units. A couple of elites, and then your chaff or battle line units.
Exactly. You know? And because you usually get anywhere from 5 to like, you know, 7 different types of units in a box, you've got a really interactive and different gameplay. Whereas if you're going to go, I'm going to buy Sigmar models to play Warcry with, you go, okay, I go buy a box of brutes, and I get a brute with a big weapon, I get brutes with smaller weapons, and then a boss brute. And that's my Warcry warband, which is fine, but it doesn't make it feel super dynamic and interesting. And a lot of the rules you have are like on war chanters, and you want to get some Ard boys. So all of a sudden,
Weird Knob Shaman even.
Weird Knob Shaman. So all of a sudden you're buying two $50 heroes. You're buying $80 pack of Ard boys. And a $60 to $80 pack of brutes, right? So all of a sudden you've invested a good like nearly $300 in models, and you might as well be getting to Australian. You're Australian. You might be getting towards Sigmar levels of commitment, Sigmar levels of purchasing for a warband, right? And you go, that sucks. So the Underworlds, what that was good for was it would just come with like one of each type of dude. Like the Stormcast box was great for it as coming with a like a Lord. It came with a hammer, like
that was the Calthea box, right?
Oh, Xandai's Truth Seekers as well. They're both great for that. It came with a guy with a hammer, and then it came with a Vigilor with a bow and an Aetherwing. Aetherwing, Vigilor with a bow, a hammer, and like I said, a Lord. Just so many different models to kind of go, okay, I get Kickstarter Warband with that. And what interests me is they actually released something called the Crypt of Blood, which was a box set where it was like a start to learn Warcry box set where you got basically half a faction of Warcry models. And you got Vampires versus Xandai's Truth Seekers. You got Stormcast. But they were both Underworld's warbands that they had re-kitted and put into a Warcry box to say, hey, this will kick you off for your first Warcry warband. Which kind of tells you that they too are realizing what's happening with the Underworlds game, and they too are putting these in other boxes. And it's good to have like breathe life into these models again if they're not seeing play in the games they're designed for. Kind of the way they give Horus Heresy models 40k rules. But for me, I kind of go, well, maybe, and this is what, and actually to kind of come all the way back to this conversation of what got me into Warcry in the first place is maybe we could get more boxes that are those different Grand Alliances and those different factions that are very unique. And that's what they've started doing a lot in the new Warcry, which is what pulled me into the game. That's what got me involved with the game the most, where I could go, okay, they released the Quest of Soulsworn was an incredible box. An incredible Space Marine box. It was a Space Marine, Trent. A Stormcast box.
It definitely feels like that kind of warband was kind of a carryover from Underworlds, because in Underworlds it's supposed to be like an elite band of named heroes, and Pets of Soulsworn, obviously they're just different versions of Knight Questors or whatever they're called in the Stormcast Eternals, but 6 models, that's all you can bring. You can bring 6 models and that's it, but they're all very specialized at what they do, and they all bring their own unique abilities. Other Bladeborn rules into Warcry don't necessarily have that same kind of benefit. Like some of them are better, and then some of them are just bad, and then they're so awkward to bring in terms of the rules because you have to ally them in, which limits the amount of those models that you can bring in terms of their actual rules. If you're just using them as counts as, go for gold. But I think that there is a space where maybe they look at the Bladeborn system in Warcry and maybe just be like, instead of making them their own separate thing and releasing it in White Dwarfs or whatever, next edition of the compendium, they just roll them into the armies that they belong to. And then bring them into that design space instead of trying to make them their own separate thing, because people will buy them for the models. And you could probably chuck in a couple of them that have some really cool rules or whatever, like a named character. You can be like, cool, this guy has this double ability, and this quad, or like a triple ability that you bring him for along with the stat line, I think would make it so much easier than being like, with Bladeborn, you have to and you can only have 2 of them, and they can't take artifacts of power, and they can't gain renown, and they can't do this, and they can't do that, because it takes some of the sheen off of the rule set. Whereas if you just brought them as a part of your, for example, Gloomspite gets Warband, you know, you could have Grincrack, and he's like, oh, he's got a cool triple that when he does this, X, Y, and Z, to kind of bring some of that Underworlds, like, here's what he does in Underworlds. He kind of does a bit of that in Warcry, but you can bring him along with all of your other Gloomspite gets.
Yeah, like translates over better.
Yeah.
I think also with Bladeborn, what I've noticed as well is that showed up a lot with the I'm gonna forget their name, but they're the Arena, the glory of Arena. I forget exactly their name, but they're a sisters of daughters of Cain faction.
Yeah.
And they are a witch, and then she has a bunch of witch elves with her, and they each are like, they're gladiatorial style units, and they have like very scantily clad, but they have like, one has like a sword and shield, one has like a spear, a javelin, one has like a net, and they got all these like unique kind of very, you know, kind of Grecian kind of gladiatorial kind of vibes. But then I was going through their rules, and it was funny how the leader had so for those at home, how you access abilities is they're called rune marks. That tells you what unit can bring what ability.
Yeah.
So she had like the rune marks of a witch leader, like the actual leader of the coven.
Yeah.
But then she had her own abilities that were unique to the Arena.
Yeah.
And then when I looked at her ability table, it was like this one model had like access to 7 abilities.
Yeah.
And I'm going like,
that's too much to keep track of.
It's too much to keep track of. And also, like, I can't use all of these. How much of this is wasted words? Because if I have a really good double, and I can only use one ability per activation, I'm not going to be spending it more often than not on those 6 other abilities.
Yeah.
I'm going to be using the one that matters. And it felt like, I looked at this and went like, oh my God, because I was going to play them myself. And I saw the ability line. I was like, oh, it's so much to keep track of. I can't even imagine. And I felt it was really unbalanced, not overpowered, but just simply unbalanced, where it's like, you know, you've got the Starblood Stalkers where a model might have 1 ability, and it's just basically a Saurus dude with 1 extra like strength.
Yeah.
But they've got this unit, which is like, oh my God, it's got so much that it's got access to. Then you look at its stat block, and it is just the leader with an extra attack or an extra strength.
And usually probably another 10 to 35 point premium on top of that to bring a named character. But you bring like 7 abilities on top of what you could already bring anyway for lesser points.
Exactly.
You know, it feels like, and coming back to the sort of Crypt of Blood thing, it's like, I'm glad that they want to start sort of filtering out those Underworld models into these like cheaper entry boxes, because Warcry also has its main release boxes, which come with terrain and 2 bespoke warbands, and they're like the core of the game experience in Warcry. It's like
they come with like rule books and stuff too.
They bring out new rule books with terrain rules and stuff like that, which is also really fun. But with Crypt of Blood, it feels like, oh, here's your cardboard box terrain, here's your mat, and here's 2 warbands, quote unquote, that aren't even full warbands, that if you were to run them even as counts as, you're still going to have to invest in another box.
Exactly.
Versus spending that extra money to buy the proper thing that comes with the tokens, the measuring tools, 2 bespoke warbands, terrain, and the playmat as well. Like, I feel like Crypt of Blood kind of misses the mark in that respect, but as a way to possibly wean Underworlds players into the Warcry experience.
Yeah, more homogeny. Yeah. Really get, like, if this comes back to like the idea of like, I think why Warcry even exists in the first place. It's just, you know, if people don't want to play Age of Sigma anymore, they just don't have the time for it, their jobs are busy, they just want a different experience, we can pull them into another game experience and have them in. And this, I don't want to sound cynical, but this is the Games Workshop of like, have them invest further.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that Crypt of Blood does have terrain in it.
Yeah.
Fun fact. So it's got like it's got 4 walls and then a statue in the center.
Yeah.
It's not nearly enough. It has no verticality, which is where I think terrain benefits the most.
That's where a lot of Warcry like differentiated itself from mainline AOS, is because you have less models to worry about. You can get into the nitty-gritty of that verticality. And when you don't have that, that's one of the selling points of the game, kind of not quite present for that gaming experience as an introductory tool. I almost think like maybe it would be a fun like auxiliary product if instead of doing just the 2, they put 4 of the Underworld's warbands into the Crypt of Blood and just made it like a multiplayer experience with the Warcry rules.
Or even just like a Allies of Convenience, where it's like, you know, at the start of the game, maybe the players roll off and then that determines which faction they get to play.
Yeah.
And there's like a drafting session, like period where it's like, I want to pick this faction. Okay, then I'll pick this faction. And it's like, then I pick the third faction, which gives me my team.
And then it also kind of feels like at that point you get into a little bit of like a god tier type thing, where it's like you've got these elite war bands and stuff. But I mean, each of the Grand Alliances and like armies in at this point, you've got 2 Chaos war bands that are like Slaves to Darkness, and you've got 2 of the Sylvaneth, and you've got 2 Stormcast, and you've got 2 of the Orc war bands, and you've got like all the Underworlds ones. Essentially, most of the main armies that people are going to play have 2 of those. Put them both together, and that can be a war band.
It's so easy. The thing is, like, look at like Orcs, where they've got Cruel Boys, Iron Jaws, and Bone Splitters as separate factions. They've got 3. The Stormcast have 4, not counting their bespoke, because the Stormcast have the Warrior Chamber, the Redemption Chamber, the Thunderstrike Chamber, thank you, and the Sacrosanct. So they've got 4 different chambers as well, which is each an entirely unique faction that has its own rules. And there's some overlap because Stormcast do the Stormcast thing. Like, they all explode on death. And they all have access to, there's like a single double, I think most of them have access to. So, which like Sigmar's Lightning. And then if there's a model that they can kind of each bring that kind of has the same weapon loadout, they'll each have the same ability for that. However, a lot of their rules are unique. So I feel I also agree that it's like, it would be difficult to go, hey, here's a like Sacrosanct Chamber looking Underworld's warband. And here's a, newer Thunderstrike Chamber. And that's like an easy to make a little warband right there. And that's, I totally agree. But that's not to take anything away from the game itself. Because that's like, to talk about these things, like we're just being fair and just talk about the things that are kind of like maybe, and this is very nuanced what we're talking about as well, where we're like, if you know anything about Warcry, you may have already tuned out because it's just like, we're talking about like very specific stuff. However, the game itself is really, really enjoyable, and you've landed on this a little bit earlier. On the narrative sense, because again, like I said, what got me into the game, it was the kit bashing my models, giving them character, giving them names, making them feel really important. And Warcry, and this wasn't really necessarily true in the first edition of Warcry. This is really true in the 1.5 and going forward into 2.0 and such, moving forward. The narrative like Warcry rules are really engaging and fun. And this is the thing that like I want to get into very quickly, where I played a lot of narrative settings before, and for me, they sometimes get a little bit too big.
They get too bloated in the progression and items and resource and da-da-da-da. Like, I think of Mordheim, great game, but in your post-game phase, you're doing a lot of bookkeeping.
Necromunda's the same.
Necromunda is even worse for it, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I think that, like, I even mean, like, so for example, in, like, Warhammer 40k, like, I was reading the new Tyranid book in 10th edition, right? And I was reading their Crusade rules, and I was looking at the last Crusade rules from 9th edition, and I was looking at the Tower Crusade rules, and I was like, okay, we're not going there again, surely. And I looked at the 10th edition Crusade rules, and while mechanically they were set fairly simple, what they did was they went, if you're playing Tyranids in a Crusade, okay, how you upgrade, right, is that you generate planets, and then you consume planets. And if you consume planets in certain ways, you get benefits. And each game you play, as you play through your campaign or as you play through it, you represent different stages of consuming the planet. And I went to myself like, that's so hard to tell a story within. Like, if I'm versing you, right, and you're like, I want to play a Crusade with you, I'll play a narrative system. And the system is that I'm playing, like, a ragtag team of Red Corsairs who are on their last stand against, like, a group of Tyranids. But we start the narrative with you guys finding, like, my small fledgling Tyranid group, and I'm growing. If I'm out, like, doing my narrative stuff, I'm like, I destroyed 3 planets, like, yesterday. Like, at the end of the game, cool, I just consumed another planet, I'm here. Your rules aren't to do with that. Your rules are like, we finished, like, we planted another flag on this base, or we did this other,
or we sacked this trade route.
It's
way more grounded.
Exactly. And I think that's good to have, like, interesting stuff. But for me, it was like, it became so hard to tell a story. But with Warcry, all of the narrative stuff is consistent among all the factions. And it all wraps really well. It always says, hey, you guys are in some part of the Narwood. And within that Narwood, there are some territories that exist within the Narwood, and you are each vying for control over these territories. And then as you play, and as you go into those territories, you dig within them and you find unique artifacts. And then you use those artifacts against each other when you're fighting over those territories. It seems really cut and dry, really simple to understand. And there is a 7-step aftermath sequence, so it's not like it's a small amount of work to do. There's not a small amount of bookkeeping. The actual translation of the literal bookkeeping, like the translation from what am I doing in my Artifact step to what am I writing on paper and have to remember for the next game is still fairly minimal.
Yeah.
So it's deep and complex and fun, but you're not, like I said, like you mentioned with Mordheim and Necromunda, you're not keeping track of so much that becomes frustrating.
Yeah. And I think, I think back to like when I first looked at the narrative rules, the first thing that came to my mind was Path to Glory, because it has a very similar kind of base for the rule set, where it's like you name your characters and then you go forth and progress and you generate resources to spend on buying new units. That has been a tried and true tested Warhammer, experience for like in fantasy and in 40k.
It's true. That still exists in Crusade.
I mean, I know how many you've played. You've probably played your fair share, but I played about 3 Path to Glory campaigns, 2 of them 40k. And then one was an attempt at an AOS campaign, but it all kind of fell by the wayside early doors. But that rule set has always been very interesting. And I like that in Warcry, they've taken that and they've added bits on, but they've streamlined it so well that the bookkeeping is minimal, but it's still fun. Like one of the things that I can recall from my Iron Jaws warband, I had a weird knob shaman. You'd got it for me as a birthday present, I believe, which thank you again. I built it, painted it. It was great. I was like, I'd done the quest. You have to do a quest to either win a match or pay 5 glory to recruit him. Recruited him to the warband. Got through his first game. I lost, but he didn't die. And I was like, oh, cool. That's a cool win. And I was already brewing like ideas in my head, like, oh, he's going to corrupt the second in command and try and, he's going to be like, yeah, he may be bigger, but you're more cunning. And, you need to use that thinking brain to climb to the top. I chose to send him out to do an exploration roll in the Gnarlwood, and I rolled Snake Eyes. So he had to make an injury roll. Rolled Snake Eyes twice in a row. Literally his first game, died off screen.
Yeah, he walked out. He went to get like cigarettes and milk and never came back.
And never came back. And I was sitting there across the table from Matt, my opponent, and I just like looked down. We both looked at the dice and then we just cracked up laughing for like 5 minutes. It's just like, oh, cool. So like he was starting the machinations of this weird woo-woo magic and then goes off into the thing and gets eaten by the Gnarlwood and just never seen again. So like the character, his name was Ed Hunter, basically was like, oh, my substitute father figure, or as close as you can get to an orc, has literally come into my life and then Homer Simpsoned himself into the bushes and just died.
Amazing.
Which is great. Like, it's those kinds of moments. It's like, it was literally 2 rolls and that was it. And then the rest of the aftermath sequence, I guess I'm just going to pay for more orcs then. And just like, it's just so funny, man.
And I think it's a great system for that. I think it's great kind of system for kind of, again, we call it beer and pretzels, but not really caring and just laughing up with the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And that was the thing as well. You guys create a lot of stories. You and Matt specifically as well create a lot of stories around young Magnus, his kind of leader character, and Ed Hunter and your warband,
Toe Cutter as well,
and like how they kind of interact with each other. And I think that's where Warcry goes from being like a simple system with a bit of tactical depth to being like a kind of long stay hobby.
Yeah.
It's like, the narrative systems allow you to kind of go, well, I want to come back next week because I want to do this game with this player because I want to make sure that this thing happens.
It is almost like an RPG in and of itself, but like plays out on the table. Like we were playing Lancer, which very much feels like a role-playing miniatures combat game.
It is very skirmish tactical.
Warcry is a miniatures game with that role-playing element, which is like, how much you put in is how much you get out. And Matt and I put a lot into the narrative and more casual things. And to kind of go back a few episodes when we had Lockie on talking about suboptimal choices in terms of casual play, Matt and I would often make suboptimal choices and forego the objective in order to play out the narrative sense of this grudge between this up-and-coming lord and this big hulking orc who for some reason couldn't pummel the tiny Yumi into submission. Yeah. And it was like, the unstoppable force meets the immovable object, and it was just great to see how that played out.
Yeah, I played a game recently, right? And I was teaching a friend Tim how to play Warcry.
Yeah.
And in our learner game, he was playing my Horns of a Shoot because again, easy faction. I was playing my Gloomspike Gits, and I didn't bring my Trogoth with me because I was like, oh, I can be a very hard model to kind of learn with.
Yeah.
That guy can just absolutely stomp you down.
It's really good.
It's really good. But I brought along my little goblins, and my first movement, because I wanted to show him what it was like to kind of get attacks in, was I just like double moved this guy, his full 8 inches just into his warband.
Yeah.
And I was like, he brings up his little sword, he's like, ah, like runs at you, and he like runs up the wind and ends his turn. He's like, well, why'd you do that? I'm like, oh, we're going to show you how to do combat. He goes, oh, am I going to come to you? I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Don't stress. He thinks he's big. He's full of himself. He's going to go up together. He tries to show off to his boss, and they're like, he's like, okay. So he like shot the guy, and he like showed off the flamer shot kind of worked, and showed off how combat worked.
Yeah.
And then he's like, okay. And then he kind of moved some guys up. And then my next goblin was like, yeah, he runs the other direction 8 inches because he just saw his friend get pummeled into like dirt. Now he had the net.
Yeah.
So he had like the most important like ability in my faction to control my opponent's movement, and I was like, he's like moving way out of his range. And even the guy was like, oh, so why are you running away like that? What's the tactics there? I'm like, the tactics is, boss, we got us to run.
Like we got us to run.
We got us to run, boss.
He's turned into a pincushion.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Warcry does great for that. I think that's what kind of drags both you and I into the game so much. And why I think it's been so popular and so kind of supported within our community is because we kind of both we both kind of shepherd the community and push forward this idea of like, you know, we want to have narrative fun within the system.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, we're doing that like through our various, you know, you're doing your next narrative campaign, which I'm very much excited to be a part of. I'm looking at putting together more of almost another competitive style event, because we had an event here last weekend?
Last weekend, yeah.
Last weekend we had our first Gnarlwood Rumble, one of, I hope, many to come. And that was sort of a showcasing of the more competitive side of the of the community, and we had a good turnout. Like, how many people? We had like 8 people.
So we sold
9.
We sold 10 tickets. And then due to sickness, 1 player dropped out. So we had 9. We had 9 players with a bye.
Yeah, which was still like a really good turnout considering like our regular nights at Warcry we have about 6 people.
Yep. Anyway, if it's a very busy night, we'll get 10. But anyway, 6 to 10.
And that's great, and I love that, and I would love to see more and more people. Like, if you're watching at home, Thursday nights at Vault in Brisbane City, come play some Warcry. You know,
if you're local to Brisbane,
if you're local to, you know, even if you're from interstate, you know, from another country, you know, my friends in the UK, hurry up.
Fly down. It's so easy.
It's so easy, dude.
So easy.
But so I want to organize my Coalition of Death, which is the multiplayer. Like, you have 2 or more people on a team. It's a team versus team Warcry experience. But then I'm also designing a sort of Vermintide Hero Hammer experience as well.
Yep.
So, you know,
we touched on that last episode too.
Yeah, like, because we love our narrative side of the things, you know, we love characters and these characters and X, Y, and Z. But some people aren't necessarily always going to want to play it for that. Some people are going to look at the more competitive elements, which is like, you know, that's also a very valid way to play the game, because, you know, there are some lists that are better than others, and over time and FAQs and everything like that. Like, when I think of, what's a really common list that people do to kind of push the envelope? I think Soul Black Gravelords. Yeah. Because
I think of like Brugits from the Gobblepalooza, making everything from destruction very powerful. I think Brugits are really pushed. But even then, we look at these factions, and you mentioned the FAQ with the Soul Black Gravelords, you know, outside of some stuff that does genuinely need to be touched on a little bit, you go, these aren't like oppressive. These aren't like unbeatable. I think the Soul Black Gravelords, for those at home, these are like the Skelly Man and like the Grave Guard and the vampires. And they're like resurrecting dead models, right? And when you only have a game of about anywhere from 3 to 15 models, making that 20 models, 22 models, you know, making that...
Your action economy is so much better compared to your opponents, who it's like, hey, if they're bringing maybe 6 or 7 orcs or whatever, you lose that orc. That's gone forever. There's no way to bring that back. Whereas you've got a 65-point skeleton that you could maybe over the course of the game bring back 3 or 4 times. That's X amount of, like, you know, obviously that changed to the wound totals, but that's X amount of activations, attacks, moves, picking up objectives.
Well, that's the thing as well. I was going to mention as well that, like, they also, so it used to be that if you picked up a model, that model would go into your initiative line and you'd be able to activate it fully in that turn. But then the FAQ, they went, oh, hang on. No, it's not like a new model you can activate. It already counts something activated. So unless you haven't activated it yet. So before it was like, oh, well, you know, even if I'm resurrecting the model over and over again, currently it's like I have 4 battle rounds. I'm still going to activate it 4 times.
Yeah.
So it's not, and in the context of a 65-point skeleton versus like a 180-point orc,
Yeah.
you go, okay, that kind of adds up. But back then it was like, I would activate it, suicide charge it in.
Yeah.
It would die. I'd get it back up, activate it again. Now I'm activating it 5, 6, 7, up to 8 times in a game. That's a lot of activations for a skeleton. No model in the game is going to activate 8 times. That's 16 actions it's taking.
Yeah. And across the law of averages, that's going to be a consistent chunk of damage. Which you are not necessarily going to need to, you're not necessarily going to be able to meet that. But that being said, it is also kind of a core part of the identity of Soul Black Gravelords as an army. So there has to be sort of a meeting in the middle kind of moment, which I think the FAQ is trying to address with that. But I want to get back more to sort of the competitive element of the game. And just sort of the decision-making becomes very different. In Warcry, when you generate battle plans, they tend to be a lot more random, and you're kind of responding in kind to the situation that you're in. It's like, oh, you got jumped on in the night, or, you've got all your guys here in the middle, and then the opponent is deploying around you at the edges, so they kind of get In the Warcry Rumble and the more competitive things, they have sort of fixed deployments and fixed objective modes. It's a little bit more like sort of your 40k or AOS, where the battle plan is laid out, and there is there's still an element of randomness where you have to roll for your deployment, but the variables are a lot less compared to your more narrative or narrative play or even open play.
I think that to add as well is that like in a lot of your narrative and open play, when you roll up when you like pull your cards in Warcry or you roll up from your tables, the deployment can be very asymmetrical. So you can have like, I've got my faction deploys in the center of the board and my opponent deploys surrounding me. I might have like my opponent's like hammer and dagger, which is the way they deploy. Certain parts of their faction might show up on turn 2, but mine don't show up on turn 2. Whereas in the competitive match play, it was always symmetrical. It was
always, everybody got the same set of, this comes in on turn 2 or turn 3. If you got the certain battle plan, you could choose to hold it back in order to change where it deployed. Those kinds of things. But also, the way that you approach to list building changes, because you're not just looking at the character of the models, you're looking at the stats and the points and the efficiency and everything like that. And with the Warcry Rumble that we had recently, it was very interesting because I brought, I play Skinks, so Seraphon Skinks, so the smaller boys, but I bring Croxagore because you need big beaters in the game. You need big models that can do big things. And
plus, they're so cool.
Yeah, plus they're great. Then they got the new models. I bought a box and it was grouse. And I was like, I'll bring 2, but I don't want to be that guy who just brings like the 3 Croxagores and nothing else. And that's kind of the linchpin of my thing. But getting close to the tournament, I didn't have time to build up the other models that I wanted to. And I realized going into the tournament that a 65, 70-point skink with 8 wounds on toughness 2 is not going to be able to stack up to a lot more of these battle line where it's like 3 attacks at strength 4, 3 to 4 toughness, X, Y, and Z. So I kind of had to go like, I'm going to make 3 Croxagores. But they proved to be pretty effective. I managed to get to 4th in the overall thing. They were quite effective. But normally in my list building, I like in a more narrative game or in a more casual game, I would be like, I feel like 3's too much.
Yeah, it's not even so much like we're not trying to apply a Croxagore like overpowered.
No.
But just more like I just don't want to be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to be like every activation is like, I have this Croxagore does this one thing, I do that thing. Next turn, I do the same thing again. And the same thing again. And if your list or playstyle is good against Croxagore, you're gonna have a good time against me. If it's not good against Croxagore, you're gonna have a bad time against me. There's no leeway. There's no like kind of flexibility or like back and forth that you can have in this list. It's like no. It becomes beat Croxagore or don't. And I think that can help in a competitive format. Like, again, I'm going to an event. Actually, I'm going to a 2-day event tomorrow. Is the first day of it in 40K. And my list, it's a teams event, so it's a little bit more makes sense. But my list is very much like, I play the Tower Empire, and it's very much like, deal with what I'm throwing at you. Play the game that I want you to play or falter. And if you're playing the game that I want you to play, I have a tough time. So I then go, I'm playing in a 5v5 teams event. We're going to draft me against people that I force that out of them.
Yeah.
So that's important. I think in a competitive state, you can go, okay, well, it kind of pulls a whole, like, I don't want to be that guy kind of out of it.
Yeah.
Because again, outside of, we don't want to imply that like winning is everything or anything like that, but there is a layer where, you want to win and you want to bring what works. And if the 3 Croxagore work for you, then they work for you.
And it did. And I didn't regret it at the end of the day. But then you look at, and we could delve even further into tactics, but like, also looking at the more competitive elements, it's more objective focused. versus like, oh, here's a target, kill this target, or here's a treasure, grab the treasure. When you have fixed objectives, it almost it adds a layer of, well, I need to build towards playing objectives, which means at some point you're going to need a certain amount of models, because how OBSEC works or objective secured works in Warcry is that if you have more physical models on the point, you control it. And then that checks at the end of each battle round. And if you move off the point at any point, but your opponent, doesn't have the models or whatever, that remains your point. But if they move more models onto that point than you've got, then they get it and it flips and that kind of thing. But if your list, like your points totals, you have to bring, these bigger units to deal with these bigger elite units that the other armies can bring, you have to sacrifice bringing some of those lower cost units, which means you almost, in list building, sacrifice some of your ability to capture objectives on the map. Exactly. Which can be very tough. Like with my skinks, it was very much like I would run out in the first turn because they had very good movement. They have 6-inch movement, which is very above average for the factions. Anywhere it's sort of between 3 to 5. Again, coming back to that 3, 4, and 5 thing. 6 is very much an outlier. But because I had to bring the Kroxigor to deal with sort of a variety of bigger threats, I could only bring my Skink Star Priest and 2 other Skinks. So I had to rely on early game, grab these objectives, and then hope that their movement wouldn't scale to a point where they just come and walk at me and then take the objectives late game.
Yeah.
And it worked, a pretty effective strategy for my three group games. But as soon as I came up against Jason, who was playing Ossiarch Bone Reapers, his idea of building for that list was, I have my big centerpiece model, my Morghast, I have an almost budget option leader, and then I have my battle line Mortek Guard that it's essentially like a Roman Legion type thing where he's got swords and then he's got shields, and he would run them in these groups of 3 and just keep them close to each other because they benefit off a shield wall, which means they'd be tougher to hit. And they're already pretty well tough for what they cost. So at that point, it's like, well, he's bringing 11 models overall. I'm bringing 7. By battle round 2, I was already X amount of points behind and I was already models down and I couldn't physically spread the models to capture any more of those objectives.
And that's that's the thing about being the Kroxigor, right?
Yeah.
The 3 Kroxigor kind of let you down because then you go, well, I've only got 5 models and there are 6 objectives.
Yeah.
And my opponent brought 11 models. They're on 7 left. There are 6 objectives all of a sudden.
And at that point, it's like, well, you kind of know that, those are sacrifices that you make for dealing with some things, but you're not necessarily always going to, come up against some things that go your way. Now, it just so happened it did for me, and I played very aggressively, but in that game, I was just outmaneuvered. Like Jason just played it better than me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what, I love Jason. He's a good member of our community. Shout out to Jason.
Shout out to Jason.
But at the end of the day, I got a kick out of it because I'm like, wow, this is really cool to see like how all these armies go in a more like I'm going for the throat as opposed to I'm playing for the more narrative and fun experience. It's like I'm here to win. I'm here to capture objectives, capture treasure, do the thing. So what was it in the second round? There was if you kill the leader, you get the 6 points minus the number of the battle round is how many points that you get.
So the earlier in the game you did it, the better.
Yeah, and it was great. And that was such a cool way because it forced the game in an interesting way, but you were still playing for those objectives.
And it meant that if you wanted to make sure your opponent you weren't like hemorrhaging points, you have to keep your leader back, but often your leader is the thing that does the most damage and has the most attacks and offers really useful buffs as well.
Indeed.
Even just generically, an ability called Inspiring Presence is very important. If your leaders know any of your important units, it just doesn't matter.
Oh yeah, it was great. That one came up trumps for me in my second game. It was really good. I was just like, cool, I activate my Skink Star Priest, and now I activate my Kroxigor sort of out of turn cycle, or for you Magic players, at instant speed. Yeah. And so in response, I'm going to activate one of my guys and then, return to normal order.
Well, that's actually, let's talk about one last thing as well, talk about like the core mechanics as well. You said in response as well, which is really cool. We haven't even mentioned that yet, but there are actions, abilities, and finally there are reactions as well. So you can actually forego using your actions to use either one the generic or your army's one unique reaction,
Yeah.
which everyone in your faction can do. And they're usually like really quite powerful. They usually care about being attacked, but sometimes there's something as simple as, they move within 3 of you. Your reaction is you move a unit close to them.
Yeah.
So you pile on. Or, for example, there's the generic one, counter, where if your opponent attacks you, for every miss, they take some damage.
Yeah.
The Sylvaneth have which are like the kind of tree pill, or like tree people, or like you should say like treants and such.
Yeah.
They have a reaction, which is when you hit them, you take damage back, because they have like thorny branches and such. So it's interesting in that respect how tactical and deep it is, because it's also not a game where, I activate my model, cool, it's your turn, I can go get a sandwich because during your turn I can't do anything. Like you always have stuff to do if you're playing around doing it.
Yeah.
Because again, if you don't have any actions, you can't do any reactions. So,
you
got to make sure you're playing around those too.
Yeah.
And I think Jason's a good example of someone who really focuses on his reactions.
Yes.
And knows when to hold, like kind of, know when to hold him, know when to fold him kind of situation, where it's like he knows, okay, well, often it is better to just sit there with my shield wall and just react rather than actually like proactively use them. So I'll let my opponent come to me more often than not. And when he has 3 models on one objective, it can be hard not to want to get involved with that, because you're like, I need to take this from you.
It's forcing you to use those actions and sink those resources into overcoming toughness 5 on 3 of his models to just, and for my warband, like if it was my Croxagore, that's easy. They're swinging out at strength 5, which can match toughness 5. But my skinks can't deal with that.
No.
And so like that's such a cool thing as well. It's like this idea of these skeletons with like a big Roman legion of bones, like sit down on the point and just like, you shall not pass, like the Black Knight from Monty Python,
Yeah.
And just cool. You're constantly having to hit them, and he's like, it's just a flesh wound. And it's like, it doesn't matter, because he's just going to hold that point, and it's great. And he's always, Jason always has a laugh. I always have a bit of a laugh as well. It's always a good time.
Yeah.
I guess I want to kind of just switch gears from less so just on the tabletop sort of thing. How did you find the organized play support as somebody who ran the tournament? Because you did TO, and very much appreciative of your efforts for doing so.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah, I think the event went really well. I think that Warcry has an interesting OP system where they make a lot of really interesting stuff for prize support. So things like acrylic tokens for your activations, for your icons, and stuff like that, and like your wound tracking and such. And they released a few things. But what I did was, we don't have much of a Underworld following here.
Yeah.
So I actually made an OP kit utilizing more of that Underworld stuff too. So actually a lot of the tokens we used for objectives and a lot of the deck boxes I handed out, that was all coming from Underworld stuff.
Yeah.
Because the Warcry OP kit is kind of like, here are some medals, here is a trophy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we couldn't use the trophy because it was from quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
Here's a trophy. And then that just like comes in a box and says, that's what you get. The organized play system is actually not as great as I would like. I think that there's a lot more they could do with the organized play system. For us, we played... Sorry, let's go back. So the Gnarlwood Rumble also, right? And this is true in a lot of different places. It's not true here, right?
Yeah.
But it's true in a lot of places. We talk about our event being quite successful with like 8 to 9 people, and that's like nothing. The Gnarlwood Rumble, like some of the events people are running are, 24 people plus, 36 people, 64 people. Big events.
Yeah.
And this Gnarlwood Rumble kind of wants you to play really, really big events, because when you read the Warcry Rumble, the Gnarlwood Champion, when you read that Warcry Rumble players pack, it gives you prize support. Well, it doesn't tell you what the prize support is or give it to you, but it tells you should make prizes for, first place, second place, first place with every single Grand Alliance.
Yeah.
And it asks for like the best painted hero, the best painted faction. We condensed a lot of that because I knew it was a much smaller event. So I was like, okay, first place gets a prize, second place gets a prize. We'll give the best painted faction a prize, and then we'll give the best sport at the event a prize.
Yes.
Right? And then I took a 500th store anniversary model from my own personal collection and put that up as the prize support for the best sport at the event.
Yeah.
And that was like, because there wasn't anything like that, in the sense that that's what I think Warhammer wants to do with their organized play.
Yeah.
They want to give you unique models, and these models, like the anniversary models, they're not unique rule sets. They're not unique characters with like their whole unique stuff. It's just like, what I had was like a Bladegeist Revenant from the Nighthaunt, and he looked a bit different. His name was Garkor, and he just looked different. It'd be great for Warcry to have your Bladegeist Revenants look very different.
Yeah.
So I was like, here, that's what I'll give out. I've bought a Cruel Boy. There's a Cruel Boy Gut Ripper boss with like a vulture that I've got at home that I want to use for Warcry soon for my Gut Rippers.
Yes.
And he doesn't have any unique rules with the vulture. It just is a cool model. And it'd be really nice if we could have OP kits with unique models inside to hand out, because it's one thing to go, they make these statues, right? And they are like black plaques with like a glass shard.
Yeah.
And I think they're meant to represent like a shard of Talaxis.
Yeah.
But they're these glass shards with like etched writing in them that say like Warcry, Rumble, 20X1. No, 2023, 2022, 2021.
Yeah.
And they'll say the year. And they'll say this is the champion right on. But like, I feel like the statues are just so minimal.
Yeah.
And they're also very modernized in the sense they are like just a very abstract shard of glass.
Yeah.
And I go, but what if instead, right, it was like one of the Black Talons?
Yeah.
What if instead it was like some orc character?
Yeah.
You know, or maybe something new. What if it was some Sigmar character?
Yeah.
That would have made me go like, this is something people would really want.
Yeah.
And that would really push people to try and do their best at these events. Because it's kind of like almost we do these things out of glory alone.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you go,
yeah.
I don't know if that would make, I don't think that's as good as what you could be offering us, is all I'm saying. So I think personally the OP kits are, I don't want to say like terrible, but they're definitely not like the higher quality that they really could be.
They feel like they're just lacking something a little bit more personalized to the Warcry gaming experience.
Or even just Warhammer gaming experience, because a lot of these different events, games, like a lot of like that's Underworld, Warcry, 40K, they don't come with those.
Yeah.
They're always coming with some generic looking statue, awesome medals, and Underworlds does it well because Underworlds releases promo cards. So they actually make like a ton of promo cards for it.
Yeah.
And I also understand from their logistics standpoint where it's like they've got to make a sculpt, make a cutout and a bunch of stuff for it and send off a ton of product that they're not selling. They're just handing out to stores to run events with. But again, if stores are running events for your game, people are investing in your game. That money is translating straight back to you. There's money there. So I don't really understand why we can't see that.
Yeah, and I think, do you think a good approach would be, because of the changing aesthetics of the game and everything like that, you do almost like a season and be like, well, this 6-month season will have, this model will be in the OP kit, because we know that they're sitting on a wealth of not only just old sculpts, but also just a lot of models that are just sitting in the warehouse not doing a lot.
Yeah.
You could bring back some cool older characters as like other models and be like, hey, here's this Chaos Troggoth model, is like a Thrug, and have that be like a top prize for a big event, or some of the Wanderers, which have now been removed from the Cities of Sigmar, stuff like that. Like obviously some of this stuff will come from like Old World as well, but like imagine if you do like a big Warcry Rumble towards the end of the year and the trophy that you get is almost like it's a not Bretonian, but it is a very, a knight who happens to hold, or have all the chivalry stuff with the Grail markings and stuff, and have that as...
Yeah, there's layers like that. I can see that. I think as well, for me, it's like you look at the way... Okay, so I think that there's another small conversation to have here about why this is the case as well. And I think the Games Workshop relies wrongly, but a lot on their kind of FOMO design nature of their unique models. So they release like a, very hard to get like Votan model, like a very rare Votan model. That Garkor, Brawler and Burka, the Iron Jaw that I gave you for your faction, the Rat Snatcher, all these models, even like the Auric Warboss that came from Warhammer Plus and like the Vindicare Assassin Warhammer Plus, and all these models, the whole point of them is that Games Workshop can constantly go, look, we release models that you could only get at very rare times. So when you see a model that's going to be very rare, it's not going to be reprinted. It's not going to come out later on, because that's the precedent that we keep setting. Yeah. So it's hard, because it's like you want them to go, hey, why don't you just access all those old sculpts you've made of all those characters? Why not just make them again and make them as part of the OP kits? It'd be so good. And they go, well, they were meant to be. They had that fear of missing out value. They were meant to be for like this exact experience.
Or the made to order things as well. Like
made to order things.
I'm still waiting on my to handle in Games Workshop.
Games Workshop.
But
so I think that comes back to I think that maybe it's a bit of a wrong thing in my personal opinion. I think like ethically there's an argument to be made against it. And I don't know if it's even a very great business decision, because it makes people kind of, I think, jaded.
Yeah.
With the Games Workshop and kind of go, oh, well, I would have really liked this model, but I guess I just couldn't get my hands on it. Yeah. And they do things like, when Leviathan came out, they released the Pyreblaster Marine, the Flamer Marine.
Infernus
and
Marines?
The Infernus Marine, thank you.
Yeah.
And the Termagant. as like free miniatures. When the
Yeah.
Voten came out, a Karthik Warrior was a free miniature for a month. You just go to a Games Workshop. If you chat with the star member, they'll give you a free miniature.
Like even when AOS first dropped, it was the Slaughter Priest with the hack blade and the chain thing. That was a free miniature and a White Dwarf from the first edition of AOS.
Yep.
And now you obviously have to pay a premium for it. But at the time, everyone's like, this is a one and only model. You could only get it from this.
And they do that as far as speaking of OP and what they offer stores. This idea of like giving out free stuff, they gave out like Liberators, right? Or no, Sequitors. They gave us Liberators as well, but they gave us Sequitors for the second edition release of Sigmar with the Stormvault. Sorry, the Soul Wars. My apologies. With the Soul Wars, where it was like this big, like kind of hammered Sequitor, and we had hundreds of them because they were given out as like learn to paint things. And I understand the company is first and foremost like a hobby and mini making company. I get that, but like. You made hundreds of Stormcast Eternals for a learn to paint that could not, it was free events that could not have made you money. But these events people are running, the people are paying to attend, they are buying models to play in. You can't support them as well. It makes me kind of go, whatever, like there's got to be a better reason.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think Warcry has, but again, right, let's take a step back, right? So a bit of a negative stance on the OP system. However, I don't think Warcry benefits from being a very competitive game. I think to an extent, it's tactical and it's deep and it's fun. And that's what keeps you coming back and makes you think. But it is a great narrative experience.
That's where the magic is.
That's where the magic is. So for me, I'm like, also the fact that I support the OP almost makes me think the Games Workshop also knows that. If I have to make excuses for them, let's be fair. They also kind of know that. And they go, well, we're not going to support the OP so much because Warcry tournaments kind of cringe. From their perspective.
Although that being said, they do run a Warcry event once every year at
Warhammer Fest.
But also they run them at Warhammer World. I was unlucky enough to have to leave the country before me and the London Gamer Group were going to do a big road trip up to Nottingham and do the Warcry event. But I promise one day I'll go back and do it because I have been to Warhammer World and it was an amazing experience. I didn't get to do all of it. The museum at the time was like, you had to like book in limited availability, that kind of thing. But just going into Bugman's and seeing the tables and everything, it was a great experience. But yeah, I do agree that I think Warcry does not live and die on its competitive element. As for the other games like 40k and AOS, I think that like the whole point of it being sort of a martial tactical sort of display of power, you're playing for a victory. With Warcry, you can still get defeated but walk away with stuff that advances the overall story and progression of your warband. And
absolutely.
And I think that's the enjoyable experience that's driving its popularity. I would almost say like I would make the comparison that maybe Warcry is to war like AOS, and to a lesser extent, just like Warhammer's entire ecosystem, what Commander is to Magic the Gathering. Whereas like it's an alternative way to play that it's casual, but it does have the room to go either side. But it's driven in its heart and soul by that more casual and sociable aspect.
Yeah, from that lens, definitely, I can see the argument there. And I think that is 100% why Warcry is a game that we want to support. Because that's the kind of game we want to play. Because much like Commander, you can play CDH, you can find your groups that works, but most people don't. And the whole thing that drives the game is that casual environment. So, and unlike Magic the Gathering, which is like, and we love it, but it is like a broken mess. Warcry is very concise. And I think that, again, with the way its rules kind of work and the granular nature of how each kind of ability and each kind of action kind of feels very homogenous, and the factions don't have too much different about them. That's so so much disparity that they can't like. I guess what I would say is you don't have like meta problems. Where things are incredibly different to each other.
The design range is between like here and here, as opposed to like all the way up here and then all the way down here.
Exactly. So
it's like minis that haven't gotten new sculpts since like the early 2000s to here's the newest models that come out with the really bonkers rules because X, Y, and Z. Warcry lives in this sort of middle territory where it's like this army over here might get a +2 that ability, but this army over here will still get that kind of version, but maybe as a double instead of a triple, and it's a +1.
But or even, you might have an ability that feels worse, but your models are cheaper, so you get on more guys. You have more options to use it. So
more opportunities.
Opportunities, exactly. So we're pretty deep in today's episode, I think.
Yeah.
I think we had some other plans to talk about today, but I think we can
Yeah.
probably wrap it up. I think we've gotten through a lot today.
That's fair.
I think the driving points we want to make is we love Warcry.
Yeah.
It's a game that we think everyone should try it. If you're at home and if you're into Warhammer in any way, and you haven't tried Warcry, you've kind of gone, is that like the Chaos game?
Yeah.
Definitely pick it up. I really, really recommend it. Again, all the rules are free on the Warhammer Community Web Store. We will have that link down below. You can just hit that. That'll take you straight to the downloads page.
Yep.
All the compendiums are free. All of the rules are free. The only things that aren't free are the bespoke warbands rules. They don't all come as free downloads. However, if you do end up buying yourself on the bespoke warbands boxes, they will have all the rules in there for you. And this isn't a case of like 40K or something like that where, you know, oh, but those rules may not be updated. Trust me, outside of some random FAQ here and there, those rules are fully updated. So you'll have no problems whatsoever.
Yeah.
Connor, do you have anything to say at the end of today's recording?
No, I think we touched on some pretty good topics here today. Like, obviously, we could sit here and yarn on, for about another, 4 hours. But
oh my God,
we both have lives to be living. But yeah, I honestly, if you're looking for a game that kind of scratches that itch, but you don't need to worry about sinking hundreds of not only hours but also dollars into the thing, I think Warcry kind of gives you that. If whether you're an enfranchised player that already has the miniatures, or someone new who's looking to sort of step their feet into the miniature wargaming world, I think Warcry is a perfect jumping off point. And I think the narrative experience alone is going to create so many enjoyable memories, as it has for me and for Trent and for everybody else in our play space, that it will keep you coming back. And that's why I think that you should definitely get onto Warcry. Plus, miniatures are fantastic. Like some of the paint jobs that we've seen as well, the personality that you can inject into them. And you know what? Sometimes even if you rock up with grayscale, but like you gray minis, which, obviously some people differ here and there. But if you've got a cracking story about that particular hero and he was the survivor of Skull Pass in the world past and is regened as, Xandar Hammer Force, of the Stormcast Eternals, that'll eat that up. That's the kind of stuff that you want to be enjoying. Yeah, it's creating those stories. Yeah,
I want to add and say that, Grey is always okay. Just get some minis on the table and try it out. Tabletop Simulator is a way to get involved with these kind of games as well, totally for free. Just give it a shot. I think that wraps up pretty well. I think that it's a great narrative system. It's a great game. Really enjoy it. It's very easy to pick up. I've taught people I think in most people's first game, they'll have the game a little bit down pat. It's only then the tactical stuff that you start to pick up on and start to learn more about. But those core rules, really easy to engage and pick up with. So it's very easy to go, like, if you have friends who maybe haven't touched much miniatures games before, but maybe they know role-playing games, Warcry might be the best experience for them because it's deep, it's tactical, it's fun, but it's not overwhelming something like a big miniatures war game can be.
Indeed. I think, bringing in sort of that winning in the role-playing game community and bringing that role, like I said earlier, it is kind of a role-playing game in some aspects. You can marry those two worlds together.
Exactly.
I guess one thing we should probably say before we go is on the Vault Games Discord is where you'll find the Warcry and Underworlds Discord channel. That's where we do a majority of our talking about the hobby. That's where a majority of our community lives. If you ever want to come in for an introductory game, you can always message myself. I'm Fireaxe _Corndog on Discord. And
I'm at Trent. You can find me too at the same place.
Yep.
We're always chatting. Even if you're not Brisbane local and you just want to jump in there, the Discord link will be in the description below. You can jump in there, have a chat with us. We're always in there chatting away. We'd love to hear from you. And speaking of which, if you are watching this video, obviously, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. This goes on every time, but it does mean the world to us. It's why we do this video for you.
Yes.
Leave a comment below. If you've tried Warcry, tell us your experiences. If you haven't played the new edition, the 1.5, let us know. Tell us
what warbands you're playing and what warbands you absolutely despise. Give us some memorable moments from the games. Exactly. Give us your experiences. We love the comment section. We're always in there reading them, having our backs and forths, and it's awesome. So basically, I think that is it. Like I said, just like and subscribe. It means the world. It costs you nothing. And means the world. So brilliant. We'll catch you guys in the next episode. We're not sure what's going to be about yet, but there's lots of stuff happening over the horizon. We just over on Hardcast MTG, we've actually opened up some new Lost Caverns of Ixalan. We've got the new Hardcast season coming up, so go check them out as well. Exciting. Very, very exciting. And then also check us out here as we release more podcast episodes. If you sneeze through this video, bless you. Wash your goddamn hands. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone. Goodbye. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.